There's something about solitude that most people misunderstand. When you say a man spends time alone, they assume he's lonely, broken, or antisocial. But let me tell you something, that man might be the most dangerous person in the room. Why? Because solitude breeds self-mastery. And self-mastery, that's a superpower most people never tap into. See, when a man is constantly surrounded by noise, people talking, opinions flying, distractions everywhere, he never really hears his own voice. So he's just reacting, bouncing from one situation to the next, one emotion to another, like a pinball in a machine someone else is playing. But when a man gets alone, when he chooses to step away from the crowd, something shifts. That stillness, that silence, it starts working on him. At first, it's uncomfortable. Let's not lie about it. When the noise dies down, you're left with yourself, and that's when the real fight begins. You've got to face your own thoughts. No filters, no escapes, no scrolling. Just you, your fears, your doubts, your regrets, and your dreams. 2. You see who you really are. And that's the point where most people run. They reach for distraction, they drown themselves in company or activity, anything but sitting still. But the man who stays, the one who leans into the silence and decides not to run from it, that man starts to transform. Because in that silence, you begin to notice things. Your weaknesses, your habits, your patterns. You start holding yourself accountable in ways nobody else ever could. And once a man starts holding himself accountable, not because someone told him to, not because of guilt, not for approval, but because he decides to, now he's dangerous. Because he's no longer controlled by outside forces, he's governed from within. That kind of man doesn't need applause to feel valuable. He doesn't need company to feel worthy. He doesn't need permission to move forward. He chooses his path. And he does it with a calm that unnerves people. Why? Because you can't rattle a man who knows himself. You can't bribe him with compliments, and you can't scare him with criticism. He's done the inner work. He's had the hard conversations with himself. He's confronted his demons. And instead of burying them, he's learned to walk with them. You ever see someone who just seems still? I'm talking about that man who doesn't overreact, who doesn't jump to speak, who moves with a purpose like he already knows how this ends. That's not luck. That's discipline born in solitude. That's the result of mornings spent thinking, journaling, training, not for show, but for growth. Nights where instead of being out numbing the day, he was sitting in it, processing, learning, strategizing. And let me say this clearly, solitude is not isolation. Don't get it twisted. Isolation is what happens when you're running from the world. Solitude is when you pull away so you can return to it better, sharper, stronger. A man who isolates is hiding, but a man who chooses solitude is preparing. He's sharpening his sword. He's strengthening his mind. He's building something within that doesn't need to be seen to be real. That's why he's dangerous. Because when pressure comes, he doesn't fold. He's already had harder battles in the quiet. When chaos breaks out, he's calm not because he's emotionless, but because he's familiar with chaos. He's sat with it. He's made peace with discomfort. So now while others panic, he plots. While others react, he responds. Not louder, just deeper. And see, people don't know what to do with a man like that. They don't understand how someone can move without needing approval, how someone can be at peace without needing company, how someone can lead without shouting. But that's what self-mastery gives you, and solitude is the birthplace of self-mastery. That's where you separate the men from the boys. That's where kings are forged, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Not in noise, but in silence. So when you see a man who's always alone, don't be quick to judge. Don't assume he's broken. He might be the one man in the room who actually knows who he is. And a man who knows who he is, he's not just strong. He's unstoppable. He's dangerous. You know what's more dangerous than a man who talks a lot? A man who doesn't say much at all. The one who just sits back and watches, observes, listens. That man is studying everything, and while others are out here trying to impress, he's out here taking mental notes. Let me tell you something that'll change the way you look at people. The loudest one in the room is usually the least certain. The one always trying to prove something, always making noise, always needing to be seen, he's broadcasting his insecurity. But the quiet one, the man who keeps to himself and watches, that's the one who's learning. That's the one who sees what others don't even realize they're showing. See, when a man learns to sit in silence, to just observe, he picks up on the little things. Tone of voice, body language, inconsistencies in people's stories. He sees what's not being said, and that gives him an edge most people don't even know exists. You can't manipulate a man who watches. You can't lie to someone who's paying attention. You can't fool a man who's trained himself to listen between the lines. And let me tell you, it takes discipline to observe. It takes self-control not to jump in, not to react, not to correct, not to one-up someone. It takes strength to keep your mouth shut when your ego wants to speak. But every time the man holds his tongue, he gains clarity. He lets people show who they really are, because people eventually reveal themselves if you give them enough time and space. And a man who understands that man doesn't just walk into rooms, he reads them. He doesn't just shake hands, he feels intentions. You ever been in a situation where someone asked you, you didn't say much, but you seem to know what's going on? That's what I'm talking about. That's the power of observation. And you only get it when you've trained yourself in silence. When you've learned to sit back and just absorb the atmosphere, the energy, the dynamics. While everyone else is focused on being heard, you're focused on understanding. And this kind of man, he's strategic. He's not impulsive. He's not out here moving emotionally. He's watching how people move, how they treat others, how they act when they think no one's noticing. He's putting pieces together. And when he finally decides to act or speak, it's not just noise, it's precise. It's effective because it's rooted in awareness, not impulse. Let me break it down even further. When you observe more than you speak, you start to understand not just people, but yourself. You notice your own triggers, you catch your own thoughts, you see where your reactions come from. And that gives you power, real power. The power to choose your response instead of being controlled by your emotions. Most people don't have that. They're living in reaction mode, triggered by everything, controlled by whatever's in front of them. But not the man who observes. He sees the situation before stepping into it. That's what makes him dangerous. Because now he's not just reacting to life, he's anticipating it. He's reading patterns. He knows what people are likely to do before they do it. Not because he's a mind reader, but because he's paid attention. He's been silent long enough to let people tell on themselves. And once you've mastered that skill, you can't be manipulated. You can't be blindsided. You move with intention, and that scares people who live chaotically. And here's the thing, he's not cold. He's not detached. He's just measured. He's grounded. His silence isn't a wall, it's a tool. It's how he gathers data, how he stays a step ahead, how he avoids unnecessary drama and cuts through confusion. He's not trying to impress anyone. He doesn't need to be the center of attention. He is the center of gravity, and people feel it even if they don't understand why. That's what makes a quiet man powerful. He doesn't advertise his strength, but it's felt. He doesn't interrupt. But when he speaks, people lean in, not because he's loud, but because his words carry weight. They've been filtered through thought, through observation, through wisdom. He's not speaking just to speak, he's speaking because he knows. So the next time you're in a room, pay attention to the one who's not saying much, the one in the corner watching, thinking, processing. Don't overlook him, because he's probably the most dangerous man there. He sees everything. Let me tell you something a lot of people don't realize: depth is forged in silence. A man who spends time alone isn't just escaping the world. Many times he's stepping into a deeper one, his own. And in that space, away from the noise, away from the constant input, something incredible starts to happen. His thoughts begin to stretch. When a man gets alone, not for a moment, not by accident, but intentionally, his mind starts. It starts to open in ways that don't happen when it's constantly being bombarded. We live in a world that's drowning in information but starving for wisdom. Most people are scrolling every spare second they get, chasing distraction. But that man who pulls back, that man who chooses quiet, he's not running from something, he's creating space for something more meaningful to show up. And that space is where depth lies. Because let me be real with you, some thoughts only come when everything else is turned off. Some truths only show up when the noise is gone. You can't access your deepest thoughts in the middle of a crowd. You don't meet your higher self in the middle of constant stimulation. No, you meet him in stillness, in reflection, in long walks with no destination, in late nights when it's just you and your own mind, unfiltered and uncensored. That's where clarity begins. That's where you start asking yourself questions most people avoid. Not surface level questions, but the real ones. What do I actually want? Why do I do what I do? Who am I becoming? What am I afraid of? Those kinds of questions don't come up in small talk or in group chats. They rise in solitude. And the man who spends time alone has the courage to answer them. He isn't afraid of the silence because he's discovered it's where the truth lies. And here's the thing, depth of thought doesn't just make a man smart. It makes him effective. Because now his decisions are rooted in something deeper than emotion or impulse. He's not reacting to life, he's responding to it with intention, with strategy. He's not out here chasing everything that glitters because he's already defined what matters to him in the quiet. He's filtered through the noise and he's built conviction. That kind of man, you can't sway him. You can't sell him on nonsense. His mind is anchored. And it's not just wisdom, it's creativity too. You see, in silence, ideas are born. Big ideas, ideas that can shift the direction of a life, a business, a legacy. Solitude is the breeding ground for innovation because when a man is alone, he's not competing for attention. He's not performing, he's exploring. He's playing with thoughts, questioning assumptions, testing possibilities. And the thoughts that come from that space, they're original. They're sharp. They cut through all the recycled noise out here. Most people are just echoing what they've heard, repeating what someone else said. But the man who thinks deeply, he creates. His ideas are his own. His convictions are rooted. His mind is layered, and people feel that. They might not even know why they're drawn to him, but it's because he's carrying something different. He's not shallow. He's not drifting. He's anchored. Now, I know some folks think being deep means being distant or hard to understand, but that's not it. A deep man doesn't confuse people, he grounds them. He speaks in a way that cuts through fluff because his words come from a place that's been tested in silence. He's not trying to impress, he's trying to express. And when he talks, people listen not because he's loud, but because what he's saying resonates. It carries weight. And that weight comes from the hours, days, maybe even years he's spent thinking things through. From the inner battles, from the quiet wins no one saw, from the moments of doubt he wrestled with and turned into clarity. That's what gives him presence. That's what gives him wisdom. That's what makes him dangerous, not just because he's smart, but because he's clear. And clarity in a confused world, that's a weapon. So no, a man who spends time alone isn't wasting time. He's doing the work most people are too scared to do. He's not just thinking, he's deepening. And when that kind of man shows up in the world, he doesn't just make noise, he makes impact. Because depth doesn't shout, it echoes. One of the most powerful things about a man who spends time alone is this: he learns how to think for himself. And that's rare. I mean, really rare. Most people don't realize how many of their thoughts, opinions, and even decisions are borrowed. They go along with what's popular, what's trending, what their friends say, what their family expects. But the man who's comfortable in solitude, he breaks free from all that. He becomes immune to peer pressure, not because he's stubborn, but because he's sure. You see, when you spend enough time alone, you start hearing your own voice louder than everyone else's. You stop being pulled in 1,000 directions by what everyone else wants or thinks. You develop your own compass. And once that happens, you're not out here looking for approval anymore. You're not changing your mind just to fit in. You're not watering down your values to avoid conflict. You stand where you stand. And when a man stands on conviction rather than consensus, he's dangerous in the best way. It's easy to agree with the crowd when the crowd is loud. But it takes strength to stand still when everyone else is moving. That kind of strength doesn't come from reading quotes or watching motivational videos. It comes from sitting with your own thoughts long enough to know which ones are truly yours. And most people never do that. They're too afraid of being alone with themselves. So they blend in, they conform, they compromise. But the man who's been alone, who's wrestled with his own beliefs and questioned his own motives, he's not afraid to walk away. Not just from people, but from anything that doesn't align with his truth. And that truth didn't come easy. It came from reflection, from silence, from saying no when it was easier to say yes, from choosing character over comfort. And the more he did it, the more he realized he doesn't need the crowd. The crowd needs him. And it shows. You can tell when a man isn't trying to impress anyone. You can feel it. His energy is different. He's not trying to win people over. He's not adjusting himself depending on who's watching. He's consistent, grounded. And in a world full of masks and performances, that kind of authenticity is disruptive. It makes people uncomfortable because it reminds them of what they're not doing. It reflects their own compromise. But see, he's not trying to prove a point. He's just living his truth. And that quiet confidence, that certainty that comes from self-trust, that's what makes him so dangerous. Not in an aggressive way, but in a way that makes you pause. Makes you question. Makes you respect him, even if you don't agree with him. Because you can't shake a man who's not leaning on your approval. And let me tell you something else. When that kind of man enters a room, he doesn't blend in, even if he doesn't say a word. People notice. They sense the weight he carries, not because he's loud or flashy, but because he knows who he is. And people who don't know who they are will always feel challenged by that, because he doesn't play by their rules. He's not motivated by the same things. He's already detached from their opinions, so they have no leverage. That's what makes him immune. You can't pressure a man who doesn't fear being alone. You can't bully a man who's already accepted his own imperfections. You can't cancel someone who doesn't crave your applause. He's not dependent on external validation. His value is internal. And once a man realizes that, he becomes free, truly free. And freedom, real freedom, is always going to be threatening to those who are still enslaved by the need to fit in. But that's not his concern. He didn't get strong in solitude to become a follower. He didn't get clear on his values just to trade them for comfort. He didn't build himself in silence just to crumble under noise. He's built different. He's moved from needing acceptance to embodying alignment. He's not trying to belong, he's too busy being. And the world needs more of that. Men who are anchored, men who aren't afraid to walk alone if it means walking in truth. Men who don't shift with every wind of opinion, but instead become the still point others can look to when everything else is chaos. So no, you can't pressure a man like that. You can't shake him, sell him, or silence him. He's already chosen his path. And he's walking it not to please others, but because it's his. He's not part of the crowd, he commands it. Let me tell you something most people never stop to think about. When a man spends time alone, he doesn't just reflect. He builds. He builds mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but he also builds practically. He sharpens his skills. He refines his thinking. He levels up quietly with no announcement, no audience, no applause. And that's what makes him dangerous, because by the time the world notices, it's already too late. He's already moved, already mastered, already miles ahead. See, a man who isolates himself with purpose isn't wasting time. He's using time like a weapon. While others are out chasing distractions, he's deep in the lab reading, studying, training, practicing. Day after day. It doesn't look exciting, it doesn't get attention, but it's compound growth. The kind of growth that doesn't show until one day it hits, and when it hits, it's undeniable. Suddenly, he's not the man people remember. He's sharper, quieter, stronger, more focused. And people start asking, when did this happen? But it didn't just happen. It was being built the whole time in silence. And you know why that's so powerful? Because no one sees it coming. The man who stays low, who keeps quiet, who disappears into discipline, he's not on the radar. He's not talking about what he's going to do. He's doing it in the dark, alone. While people are out here trying to be seen, he's out here trying to be ready. And when the time comes, when the opportunity shows up, he doesn't need time to prepare. He is prepared. And that's what makes him lethal. Because readiness isn't created in the moment, it's revealed in the moment. And he's already put in the work. But here's the deeper part. A man who builds in solitude doesn't just get better at something, he becomes someone else. He becomes disciplined. He becomes strategic. He becomes clear. He becomes dangerous, not because he's chasing power, but because he's mastered himself. And self-mastery produces results the world can't ignore. Because eventually silence turns into skill. Isolation turns into elevation. Preparation turns into execution. And when that man moves, it moves with force. And here's what people don't get. He wasn't motivated every day. He didn't feel inspired every morning. But he did it anyway. That's the part they don't see. They see the results and say he's gifted or he's lucky. But they don't see the nights he sat alone, studying while everyone else was sleeping. They don't see the sacrifices, the discipline, the boring reps, the consistent grind with no promise of reward. That's what forged him. That's what made him dangerous. And he's not doing it for approval. He's not doing it for validation. He's doing it because he knows what's possible. He's seen the man he could become, and he's chasing that vision, not someone else's expectations. That vision came to him in silence. It came to him when the world was quiet and his mind was finally clear. And now he's honoring that vision every day, brick by brick, while no one's watching. So when he walks into a room, he doesn't need to say much. His presence speaks, because he's carrying something most people never find: a deep, quiet confidence that comes from preparation. He knows what he knows. He's earned what he has. He didn't skip steps. He didn't fake it. He became it. And people feel that. They respect it, even if they don't understand it. That's why I always say, don't underestimate the man who disappears for a season. I don't, nor the one who pulls back, who stops posting, who starts saying no more than he says yes. That man is not fading, he's forging. He's not quitting, he's qualifying. He's not avoiding the world, he's preparing to impact it. And when he returns, he won't be asking for a seat at the table. He'll be building his own. And here's the part that should really wake you up. When a man sharpens himself in solitude, he becomes a weapon. Not in the sense of violence, but in the sense of effectiveness. He can walk into a situation and shift it. He can speak a few words and shift perspective. He can make one move and shift momentum. Because he's not guessing anymore. He's not reacting, he's executing. So while others waste time talking about what they want to do, the man who went silent is already doing it. Already built for it. Already dangerous. Because silence was never empty, it was training. Let me say this plainly: when a man has spent time alone, really sat with himself, really wrestled with his demons and his dreams, he becomes someone you can't control. Not because he's defiant, but because he's free. He's not driven by fear anymore. He's not moved by pressure. He's not reacting to every opinion tossed his way. That man has already faced the hardest person in the room himself, and he didn't flinch. When a man gets quiet, when he turns the volume down on the world and turns the volume up on his own soul, something changes. He starts stripping away every lie he ever believed, every false label, every fear-based limitation. All the stuff that came from parents, teachers, society, culture. He holds it up in front of him and asks, does this belong to me? And if it doesn't, he lets it go. That's the power of solitude. It clears the fog. It reveals what's real. And once you see truth for yourself, no one can sell you a lie again. And that kind of man, he becomes untouchable. Not because he's cold, but because he's clarified. He doesn't owe explanations for who he is. He's not asking permission to evolve. He's already done the inner work. And now he's simply walking in it. That walk, that's what makes him dangerous. Because he's not walking to please, he's not walking to follow. He's walking with authority. Quiet, confident authority. the kind that can't be manufactured. It can only be earned through solitude, struggle, and self-honesty. Most people are terrified of being alone, not because they don't like the quiet, but because they don't like what they hear in the quiet. The noise of their regrets, their insecurities, the fear they try to drown out with busyness. But a man who chooses to face that noise instead of run from it, that man becomes resilient. He gets stronger from the inside out. And when life throws its punches, he doesn't crumble, he absorbs, he adapts, and then he advances because he's already had the hardest conversations with himself. And you know what else happens? He stops needing to win arguments. He stops trying to prove people wrong. He's not chasing validation anymore. He's not competing with anybody because he understands none of that is real power. Real power is peace. Real power is knowing who you are, where you're going, and not letting anyone knock you off course. And that peace, that level of centeredness, that's what people don't know how to deal with. They can't figure him out, can't provoke him, can't shake him. That's what makes him unpredictable. And unpredictable men are dangerous because the world is used to people being predictable, doing what's expected, following the script, staying in their lane. But not him. He burned the script a long time ago. He's not playing a role. He's being fully, freely, and unapologetically. And you can't box that in. You can't manipulate that. You can't pressure a man who doesn't fear loss. You can't bribe a man who doesn't crave recognition. That's the man the world quietly fears, even if it won't admit it. And the best part, he doesn't need to posture. He doesn't need to talk about how free he is. He shows it in how he moves, in what he tolerates, in what he walks away from, in what he refuses to entertain. Because he knows peace is expensive and he's not about to trade it for temporary approval or shallow comfort. He's not reactive anymore. He's intentional, deliberate, calm. And calm is a superpower in a world that runs on chaos. This man becomes a mirror. When people are around him, they feel their own noise, their own disorder, their own confusion. Because he's not matching their energy, he's standing in his, still, steady, clear. And some people will love that. Some people will hate it. But either way, he's not changing. Because he's not trying to be liked, he's trying to be true. That's why the man who has mastered solitude is not just quiet, he's a force. A force that moves through life with conviction. A force that creates change without asking for attention. A force that disrupts everything fake, everything surface, everything shallow just by existing. And he didn't become that by accident. He became that by getting alone, getting clear, and getting free. Because a man who doesn't need the world's permission is the man the world can't control.